heritage. She advised members on both the House and the Senate sides of Capitol Hill and served as a Presidential Management Fellow for 2 years at the Pentagon. So with that, I will turn it over to Mackenzie to begin the discussion.
Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for coming out on a awfully dreary day. It's great to see so many friendly faces in the audience, and some of you I haven't met, but welcome. With this kind of a crowd, I feel kind of guilty because, as I was just telling Tom, I'm probably not going to tell you anything you don't already know. But nonetheless, I will start out by saying that most Americans are aware that one of the purposes of the federal government in the Constitution, of course, is to provide for the common defense. But many are unaware of the extent to which the document shows the founders' concern for national security. In brief, the Constitution says 3 things about the responsibility of the federal government for national defense. Number 1, national defense is the priority job of the federal government. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lists 17 separate powers granted to Congress. 6 of those deal exclusively with national defense, far more than any other specific area of governance, and they grant the full range of authorities necessary for establishing the defense of the nation as it was then understood. Number 2, national defense is the only mandatory function of the federal government, which of course is ironic since defense spending is not considered mandatory by policymakers. Most of the powers granted to Congress by the Constitution are permissive in nature. They're given certain authorities, but not required by the Constitution to exercise them in Congress. But the Constitution requires the federal government to protect the nation. And third and last, national defense is exclusively the function of the federal government. Under our Constitution, the states are generally sovereign, but Article 1, Section 10 does specifically prohibit the states, except with consent of Congress, from keeping troops or warships in times of peace or war. The great irony of our time is that the bigger the federal government has become, the less well, I would argue, it has performed its priority function of providing for the common defense. Now, why are we here today to have this discussion? It's not about the defense budget or a top line or a fight with liberals or anything like that. I believe defense issues are nonpartisan in nature, and that the U.S. leadership role in the world that has been part of the post-World War II last half century will continue for the foreseeable future. America has lived through and enjoyed the benefits of an era of general peace and prosperity where freedom has flourished. And the foundation of that era was the decisive predominance of American power, and that begins with military strength. It's certainly not the only component of that, but it begins there. The sacrifice necessary to sustain that power is modest, and the risks of failing to do so are enormous. Ever since the end of World War II, American power has been the chief deterrent to aggression, the shield under which other soft power tools of diplomacy, trade, and engagement have produced unprecedented progress towards freedom and democracy, but that shield is cracking. America's global influence is being checked and in some cases rolled back, and even the homeland is no longer fully safe from attack. While many people are seeking to cut core defense capabilities, many of which the nation has, again, relied upon for the past half century and in some cases come to take for granted, this is really an effort for those who see cuts to change U.S. foreign policy. But the reality is that no post-World War II president of either political party has backed away from the nation's expansive leadership role, nor has any president of either political party significantly reduced the United States' foreign policy commitments around the world by treaty or interest. In fact, the number and scope of U.S. military missions has expanded in the last 15 years, while the overall size of the military has been reduced. As long as the United States undertakes a comprehensive role in guiding the international order towards peace and freedom, our nation's leaders must sustain the power necessary to accomplish that mission. Now, a lot of people think that the military fights and wins our wars, which they do, and which they're doing right now. But the military has another critical component that is often forgotten and not talked about enough, which is deterrence. You build up a military not just to fight the war, but win the peace. Our military provides the underpinning for the nation's soft power tools to flourish, as I've mentioned. Things like supporting sanctions enforcements and strengthening diplomatic negotiations. I firmly believe that economic growth is connected to the stability and the prosperity of the global economy. And the nation uses its naval capabilities, for example, to guarantee sea trade, which allows commerce, free trade, and business to flourish. How we invest in hard power affects our national security interests. For example, last year, Australia announced its biggest military buildup since World War II in response to the changing regional security environment, but it also specifically cited declining U.S. supremacy in the Pacific Ocean and China's rapidly growing Navy. The United States should not only prepare for the full array of risks, but also maintain substantial safety and technologically superiority margins. Seeking to have just enough of any core capability would be foolish. Planning is never perfect, of course, but the cost of being too strong is far less than the cost of being too weak. There is no sign of any fundamental change in U.S. foreign policy forthcoming. Rather, it's more likely the nation will ask the military to do even more than it's doing today over the next 20 years. Every category of risk facing the United States is arguably growing and has been growing since the end of the Cold War. Before the war on terrorism, before North Korea developed nuclear weapons, before Iran launched its nuclear program, before the dangers of things like cyber attack and bioweapons attack were recognized, and at a time when Russia and China were weaker militarily. Instead of asking the question first, how can we cut defense? The nation's policymakers must first ask what is required to protect the nation, and let the answers flow from there.